Hump Day, welcome into a fresh edition of Daily Faceoff live on the Daily Faceoff YouTube, and as always, brought to you by our friends over at Fountain Tire. You and your family's safety is important, which is why Fountain Tire treats your vehicle like it's their vehicle. Whether it's a new set of new tires or maybe your engine has a little rattle, stop into Fountain Tire today, and not only will they sort you out, they'll save you some money. You can save up to $225 on a set of 4 select tires, including Goodyear, until December 14th, plus an extra $50 on any service of $150 or more. Some restrictions apply. FountainTire.com. Frank Saravalli, it's the best day of the year. The comment section's loving it. Trade targets already? Trade targets? Everyone's fired up for our big segment today. How excited are you to have the first trade targets list of the year out?
Oh, it's such a relief. I feel like the pressure to get some decent intel and info at a time when it's really quiet generally for the most part. But I think trade talks have been percolating a little bit, and you see some teams that are really unhappy with their lot in the standings. Will they make a move to shake it up? I think the problem with the NHL, it's not a problem specifically. This is just an anecdotal. I was actually talking to a GM about this yesterday. He's like, I'd like to make a move. But he goes, I'm at this place in the standings, whatever play, 20-something place. He goes, everyone sees me there. And instead of just making a normal deal, he said, now it's like the price is 2x of what it normally is because they know that you're desperate to do something. He goes, if the price was just what the price normally is and potentially what it might be in March, well, then we could make a deal. But I'm not going to pay double just because I'm off to a bad start.
Now, what's your old line? GMs throw other GMs anvils, not life rafts?
Yeah. They're anvils disguised as life jackets.
There you go. Yeah. We'll talk about trade targets in a little bit, but there was a lot of news yesterday around the NHL and one interesting matchup we want to talk about as well. But let's start with what we got yesterday, the early reports in the morning, and then it was confirmed later in the afternoon that Jim Montgomery is out as the Boston Bruins head coach. You get a look here at his all-time coaching record. This is a guy who wins a heck of a lot more than he loses. And you look at that record down a little bit lower on the graphic, Frank, his record with the Bruins is absolutely sparkling, but the lifeless start to the year ended up being too much.
Yeah, 184 games coached with the Boston Bruins and 41 losses in regulation, 715 winning percentage. And I think this is when you start to see reaction from the coaching fraternity. You see Craig Berube this morning addressing it with Toronto. He had Jim Montgomery on his bench as an assistant in St. Louis for a couple years. He said, this one hurts. It's a tough business. He said, I feel for coaches all the time, but, I take this one a little bit personal. And I got multiple messages from current NHL head coaches who basically said, man, what a business. It doesn't matter how the players play, where the reaction or blame gets placed. It's never typically on the management or president or front office. It always ends up being the coach's head to roll. And just consider some perspective here. I'm not saying everything that happened this season with Jim Montgomery was perfect, but it's 2024. And so 2023 and 2022, there's 3 finalists each year for the Jack Adams. All 6 from 2022 and 2023 have now all been fired. All of them are gone. Good night. See you later. You are now working for another team. How's that work? How does a 715 winning percentage, how's that not enough? And I think maybe we should have seen the writing on the wall a little bit. The fact that Montgomery had averaged essentially 120 some points over his first 2 years with the Boston Bruins and didn't have an extension heading into this season. So in a lot of ways, it kind of felt like this is untenable. There's tons of noise about the coach, lifeless starts. He's essentially gone after all of the big name pieces, whether it was a discussion with Brad Marchand on the bench or being critical of David Pastrnak in the playoffs, or now most recently saying something about Jeremy Swayman and the goaltending. Look, a lot of things have gone wrong in Boston this season. Still just 8-9-3, still 2 or 3 wins away from second or third place in the division. And yet we've got a coaching change. Sometimes feels cruel, and in a lot of ways feels like they got the wrong guy.
Yeah, absolutely. It also is interesting to go look at the previous Jack Adams winners and see how many of them end up losing their job within 2.5 years. Like, being the coach of the year does not give you any sort of job security, but that's the era we're in right now. Like, remember when we talked to Ty Anderson, like Jim Montgomery was a top 10 tenured coach in the league, and he had barely, it feels like just yesterday, he was even hired. It is wild, Frank.
And look, I'm still a believer in the Boston Bruins through all of this, which is crazy. Do you think that Jeremy Swayman is going to continue to play at an 880 something clip this year? I personally don't. I think he's much better than that. This Bruins defense core is better than that. Their offense is going to somehow find a way to get out of this funk in which their most productive line has been their fourth line. All of those things probably will change at some point in time. And look, at the end of the day, was the coaching change justified? I'm not certain, but I can tell you that the Bruins are better than what they've shown.
Yeah,
And in saying that,
shout out to Rich Keefe out in Boston, who is way ahead on this one, as you pointed out, Frank. Joe Sacco takes over on an interim basis. Do you think this will be something that lasts through the season, or is Boston looking?
well, he's certainly going to get a pretty decent sized runway. I don't know that it's fair to say yet that he's going to last the season, but they want to give him every opportunity to earn the position. This is someone who has 4 years of NHL coaching experience. He's a Boston native, and he spent the last 10 plus seasons on the Bruins bench. So he's been around. He's been through multiple different coaches now and regimes. And this past summer, he was elevated from assistant coach to associate, which not just comes with the bump in title, but also very likely a bump in pay. So look, Sacco is someone that they want to see get an opportunity here to see if he can take the ball and run with it. And if not, then they'll address the situation.
Let's talk about what's coming up next. And listen, we've talked a ton of Boston Bruins this week. They have been the flavor du jour. But on Montgomery specifically, Frank, he was to use the term, lame duck head coach, right? No contract extension in place. Could he be a guy who maybe tries to get back into the game really quick and maybe doesn't do what some other fired coaches do, where they kind of say, hey, I'm sitting back for the year. I know I got my paycheck coming in for the next couple of seasons. I'm in no rush. Do you think there would be a market for Montgomery? Could there even be another team out there who's going like, ooh, we like that guy, maybe even more than our current guy?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a few teams right off the hop. I'll give you the Anaheim Ducks. I'll give you the St. Louis Blues. I'll give you, I don't know, pick another team in the league that's got some developing to do. Because I actually think, as good of a coach as Jim Montgomery has been, he's a really good teacher and a good developer. And so I think he'd be really well suited in an environment like that, where, look at Anaheim. It's kind of devolved to the point where in some ways it's a really toxic situation. We'll talk trade targets in a minute, but look at the start that Trevor Zegras is off to this year. They've essentially neutered his confidence and cut it off. That's really disappointing. There's a guy who was a mid-60s point player. Look at the lack of energy that the Ducks have. Look at the Blues. I think they, not a knock on Drew Bannister, but this team certainly doesn't look like one that's taking a step in the right direction. So where do you go what about Detroit? Are they any different with some of the young pieces that they have? And Derek Lalonde has seemingly been on the hot seat for a while now. The Red Wings are essentially 1 point away from being in dead last place in the division in a year in which they're supposed to take a step forward in year 6 of the Yzer plan.
Yeah, and that was kind of my next question was, sometimes we do see this little bit of a domino effect where, okay, Boston's made their coaching change. Does it turn up the temperature anywhere else? Do Red Wings fans in that market start going, whoa, they're ahead of us in the standings and they're willing to go this route? I mean, you mentioned Anaheim, who's struggling to piece things together here, although they are on a 3-game heater. Is there anywhere in specific? I guess we kind of touched on it, but do you think that's true, I guess, that the temperature now is cranked up in some of these markets?
Yeah, I do. Because whenever there's a really good coach that's available, some GM somewhere starts to get an itchy trigger finger. Mm-hmm. And I truly believe that it's up to Jim Montgomery when he decides to work again, because he's going to be given a bunch of different opportunities and cracks here.
Let's go out west, Frank, where the second big piece of the news yesterday is that the Canucks are going to be without J.T. Miller. He is taking a leave of absence from the team for personal reasons. In a statement, the Canucks said, right now, our sole focus is making sure that J.T. knows the entire organization is here to support him. What do you know about J.T. Miller, perhaps on maybe the length of this absence?
Yeah, that part is more difficult to answer. I mean, we know that he's not going to be with the team on this road trip that they're embarking on. They finished up their homestand last night, and I can't really remember a situation quite like this one where you have a guy that is the heart and soul of this team, the engine, the motor. And so I think, at least what I'm told, is that there's two parts to this. There's a physical and a mental reset. I don't think anyone would argue that physically he's been 100% this year. Think back to their swing out east against the Flyers, the time that he missed in that game, and then he just hasn't really looked the same. So that's part of it. For one, I think a lot of people suspect there's a shoulder injury there, but if that's the case, you would just say, hey, this guy's injured and he's out. So there's obviously more to it. The mental reset, look, this guy has a competitive fire that absolutely burns and rages like so few in the NHL. And I wonder what kind of toll that takes on someone to bring that every single night. And I don't think it's related at all to the benching that occurred over the weekend, but maybe that was the sign of something being a little bit off. And so I think more than anything, you just hope that JT Miller gets the time and space to fix whatever is ailing him, and that we see him back on the ice real soon, because he is a special, special part of that team. And I think on a short list of players that have really maximized and squeezed every drop out of their potential and talent, the way that he was able to take his game from one level to the next has been like truly a joy to watch. And I hope that he finds a way to get back soon.
Yeah, and I mean, for the Canucks, it's been a weird little roller coaster start to the season, but JT Miller has always been that engine. He's turned into and developed into an absolute fan favorite out in Vans. So certainly wishing the best for Miller and hoping to see him back on the ice sooner rather than later. On the ice last night, Frank, the Canucks lost to the New York Rangers, but there was another result that I found really interesting last night. It was the Winnipeg Jets getting their revenge on the Florida Panthers, and not two teams you think of as rivals, but it was the Florida Panthers who beat them earlier in the week. And, you know, I think after that insane start the Jets had, no one would have faulted them if they would have slipped up a little bit and maybe gone on a run where they only win 2 out of 5 games or whatever. But I think this actually says a lot about the Jets, that they were able to rebound in this way against a Panthers team that just beat them, fueled by a Mark Scheifele hat trick. This was, in my mind, as impressive as a win as they had during their first 15.
And it's kind of disappointing because with all the other things that we just talked about, the coaching change, the leave of absence, everything else, the game last night kind of took a back seat. And so this one felt personal. Think back to the home and home. You mentioned just playing recently and the chant from the Panthers fan base saying overrated. When you hear that, if you're the Jets and you had just set or made NHL history with your start to the season, the first thing you want to do is prove that that's not a fluke. And yeah, look, are the Jets bound to lose a few games this season? Of course they are. We all know that this regression from the start that they've had, that's coming. They're going to have some bumps in the road. But to respond against a Panthers team that has been really as good as anyone so far this season and just blew your doors off and was incredibly physical to play against, tried to run you through the second row in the stands when they played you on home ice, to bounce back the way that they have, I couldn't agree with you more that this was, to me, the most impressive statement win that any team has had so far in the first month of the season.
How about Morgan Barron popping home 2 shorthanded empty netters in the span of 21 seconds? There are only 5 players in the NHL who've scored multiple shorthanded goals this season. Barron just went bang, bang, and did it.
Well, the best part was the one of them was like, it was a lesson in geometry, like the angle banking it off the boards is so good. I mean, that if you're talking like quality of empty net goal, that's a superstar level empty net goal.
Superstar level empty net goal. That's a little bit of an oxymoron, but I definitely see where you're coming from with it.
Well, I was going to say first line, but I didn't think that did enough justice for how impressive I thought that was.
Fair. And how about Mark Scheifele again? What a start to the season for him. The engine driving this Jets team, picking up a hat trick. He is now 5th in the league in goals with 12, 3 back of the league leader in Alexander Ovechkin. Frank, the chat is itching. They want us to talk trade targets. So let's get to this week's edition of Icebreakers. There is a lot to get to with Frank Saravalli's first trade targets list of the season. If you're watching along in the YouTube and you have some questions about it, feel free to drop them in. We can get to a couple at the end, but I want to start at the top, Frank. The number one player on your list is Pittsburgh Penguins defenseman Marcus Pettersson, $4.02 million AAV, a pending UFA. He is the number one rental on your board. The sell-off could be on in Pittsburgh. This is their most valuable piece, right?
Yeah, that's the easiest way to answer it, is on a roster where you're open for business. And we've talked about this before. You might be open for business, but if you've got things that people don't want to buy, it doesn't really matter. The key here with Marcus Pettersson is that he's one of their valuable trade chips to move. And look, are there holes and or weaknesses in his game? Yes, absolutely. But at $4.02 million, which could be chopped twice and retained down to $1 million, essentially, if you really wanted to, this is someone that is a steady top 4, or I should revise that, steady number 4 defenseman to add to your lineup that defends well, skates well enough. His biggest issue is making a first pass and being able to get out of his own zone. And so it's kind of an adventure whenever he gets the puck on his stick. Short pass, long pass, chip, whatever it might be. That's what holds him back. But he's someone perfectly capable of sliding into a top 4 to play some elevated minutes, as you see here, almost 22.5 per game. He's a guy that, you know, if you're looking at the Pittsburgh Penguins and they're going to be in the bottom 5 or 8 in the league, and they already are with him, you should absolutely be doing everything you can to maximize value if you're Kyle Dubas to begin finally restocking the cupboard here.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the mantra in Pittsburgh, is try to get some assets, try to get some prospects back into that system. You know, kind of a month ago, Frank, when the season was starting and I was taking a way early look ahead at who could be a part of the rental market, it felt like it was Pettersson, Provorov, and then not really a lot else on the defensive side of things. And I think, Pat, we have a board with just the defensemen that Frank has highlighted as trade targets this year. The fact that it is Provorov and Pettersson as the standalone only 2 rentals, has that maybe propelled some other teams to be more open to trading D-men with some term?
Well, there's lots of different options here and price points. Like the most expensive player on this board would easily be David Jiricek, a 20-year-old number 6 overall pick from the Columbus Blue Jackets, who was actually just sent back to the AHL this morning. He's barely played. When he's been in the lineup, it's kind of obvious that the coaching staff doesn't trust him. The situation has unraveled. But what's interesting about this defense market as a whole, if you look at it, there's 4 right shot guys, 4 left shot guys. You've got a couple rentals. You've got a couple guys with term. You've got some youth. You've got guys who are true sort of defenders, like a Mario Ferraro, a guy who just competes and works and battles and wins battles. And then you've got someone who has a little bit of offensive flair, like Mike Matheson last year, 62 points, 9th among defense and scoring. And, you know, in all actuality, do the Montreal Canadiens want to trade Mike Matheson right now? No. We've talked earlier in the season about how their defense core is already thin. They're looking for pieces to support their young guys. They don't want their young guys playing over their heads. And yet Matheson's value, they might be forced to, based on the way that he's played, to consider something that they don't necessarily want to do, but have to do because his value this season might not ever be higher than it is right now. So different situations, but I think it's kind of developing into an interesting defense crop if that's what your team is after.
Yeah, and the other thing that's interesting is I was going through some of these guys. There's also a bunch of them that are like left shots that can play the right side and right shots that can play the left side. Like you talked about pieces that are good on the D zone, good at making a first pass. There's a lot of versatile options here as well, which I think could really increase the market for some of these guys, like a Matheson who's playing on the right side right now.
And yeah, Matheson's a great example of that. Look, you mentioned well-rounded. Like, that's the first thing I think of with Alex Carrier in Nashville. There's not one facet of his game that's really going to wow you or knock you over, but he's not bad at anything. He's good at everything that he does, but there's not like this sort of like next level that he gets to. I kind of view Ivan Provorov in a similar vein, even though he's a guy that came into the league and shown that he could be a 40 plus 50-point defenseman. That's fallen off in a big way. And, he skates well. At times he can be physical and assertive. At other times, he's got some, puck moving capabilities and skills. Like, they're all over the place. If you really want someone with size that you think can add to your group, that's Rasmus Ristolainen. So it's kind of, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but more than that, it might also be, where am I getting the most value here too? Where relative to acquisition cost, that's going to be the part that sticks out to NHL GMs.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to the team that's dominating your trade targets board, Frank. And you teased it earlier, but it's the Anaheim Ducks. They have a prime rental forward in Frank Vatrano, a defenseman with term in Cam Fowler, who's got one more year after this one, and Trevor Zegras also has one more year after this one. How active could the Ducks get early? Like, is this something where they feel a little bit of urgency to shake things up, or are they okay waiting and seeing and letting things play out to the deadline?
I don't think they feel any urgency, and they probably shouldn't. I mean, let the market develop, get the best sense of teams that you can. If you feel like you've got something right now to pull the trigger on, I mean, by all means do it, but it feels like the market's only going to develop more and more with time. And maybe timing is everything, because you look at Vatrano this season, 2 goals in 17 games. There's a guy who shot the lights out last year, 37 goals, career high of points by almost 50%. And this year, almost kind of predictably, a big drop in the opposite direction. Should they have moved on from him last year when he still had another year of term left? How much will it damage the return that they get? Because this is still a guy that had a fantastic playoff run for the New York Rangers in 2022. Good question. Can Cam Fowler's game get back to the level that we saw him at 3-4 years ago? If so, it's going to be an expensive piece. But if not, are the Anaheim Ducks willing to, sort of move on from Fowler, create some more room on their blue line, and get him moving as a guy who's closing in on playing 1,000 games, all with the Anaheim Ducks, getting moving to a team that he's way more used to, a competitive environment, because maybe things have soured a little bit. And speaking of soured, Trevor Zegras, we're approaching square peg in a round hole territory here in terms of Zegras and his fit with the Ducks. It's abundantly obvious to me and everyone else watching that Pat Verbeek doesn't seem to be a believer in this player. He hasn't found seemingly common ground with the coaching staff and Greg Cronin. The production has waned. I think more than anything, his passion looks like it's waned. This is one of those guys that oozes creativity and flair on the ice. And it's almost like they've sucked the life out of Trevor Zegras, unfortunately. This is one of the brightest young stars that we had seen in the game. Personality on the cover of a video game, pulling off incredible moves on the ice that we frankly haven't seen before. And now what? He looks like a shell of himself. And that leads me to, unfortunately for the Ducks, a matter of when and not if that they ultimately end up moving on. And that's going to be the benefit of some team, but it's also going to be really difficult for the Ducks to get to that point where they pull the trigger, because his value has been suppressed so much compared to what it once was.
Speaking of value being suppressed, I think that perfectly answers this question that SK threw in the chat. What about Gibson? Thinking he's gone this year for sure. $6.4 million, 2 more years after this one. Yes, the Ducks don't have any current retained contracts, so they could retain 3 guys this deadline if they wanted to. But I feel like they've missed the boat on trading Gibson probably by 18 months.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not confident anymore in John Gibson's ability to be a top-level NHL goalie. Like, you can put the contract and the term aside. If you have an opportunity every year with 15 to 20 goalies that become available on the open market, and yes, team play and structure in front of him certainly has a lot to do with it. And he was off to a way better start this year. But I mean, the sample size of John Gibson's last 100 games played in the NHL, he's at an .894 save percentage. That's below league average. So are you going to give up assets and cap space and everything else to acquire him? I'm not sold. I just don't know that they even have the interest at this point.
Yeah, last guy I wanted to ask you about, Frank. Again, every deadline, there seems to be like those prototypical pieces, right? Vetrano is the guy. If you want to add scoring to your top six, you go get him. If you're looking for that maybe difference maker bottom six piece, I'm looking at Yanni Gourde out in Seattle. That is a guy who has won. That is a guy who can do a lot of different things for a team's bottom six. And I would imagine those are the reasons why he's at number 2 on your list.
Yeah, also because the Kraken might be in a spot in the very near future once their roster shapes up with Vince Dunn coming off of LTIR where they have to move a forward. So there's been calls that the Kraken have received from teams with interest on Yanni Gourde. They seem resistant to that idea. In fact, he's been way more productive. I think they're more interested in potentially moving Brandon Tanev than Yanni Gourde, who's also on the list. But the way his production has slid, his ice time has been cut probably as a result, or some could argue maybe because of that, his production has slid. He's in the final year of his deal. Him and Tanev probably both make more than they should. It just certainly seems to be trending toward him being one of those deadline pieces that between now and March 7, given where the Kraken are in the standings, I have a real hard time envisioning him on the Kraken beyond March 7th at 3 p.m. Eastern.
The full article is up now at dailyfaceoff.com. Our boy Pat has thrown a link to it in the YouTube chat if you want to go check it out yourself. But we are finally there. Trade target season is among us, and a great first list from Frank. Again, full article up at dailyfaceoff.com. All right, Frank, hashtag AskDFO. I'm taking this one away from the YouTube chat. They got their question in during trade targets. There were 2 goals in the world of hockey last night. I want you to tell me which one was more impressive. Starting out in Ottawa with Oilers defenseman Evan Bouchard, who has been drawing a lot of criticism, but no one's criticizing this bad boy. A nice little toe drag slip through the feet of Thomas Chabot to open the scoring for the Edmonton Oilers. So you got this one, or we'll go to the college world. And as we watch this OT winner from Ryan Leonard, I wanted to take a listen to it as well.
Another 2-on-1 chance. Shot blocked, and then Hagen's fans on a rebound. Oh, shot!
What a play by Ryan Leonard behind his back.
That is our boy Colby Cohn from Morning Cup of Hockey on the color for that call, and all he could do was laugh. As Ryan Leonard, you got to watch it closely, but he slips that thing behind his back and finds a way to go 5 holes still. Which one of these two is more impressive to you?
I mean, look, the creativity is off the charts, and Ryan Leonard has had an unbelievable season. But to me, given the heat that Evan Bouchard has faced, given the way that he walked through that, basically coast to coast and then sort of casually flips it up over the goalie, I'm going to go with the Bouchard play, but I'll give Ryan Leonard a 10 out of 10 for creativity. But just also, like, as creative as it was, still one of the uglier sequences you've ever seen in hockey with that puck just sitting there. Could someone please do something?
Yeah, I know. I had to watch it a couple times because I was like, why is everyone saying this was so nice? And then you kind of squint and you're like, oh my God, he did like flip it and all of that. But it was a weird little broken play. Stephen Ellis in the chat, Evan Bouchard, because he's from Oakville. So shout out to Oakville and our guy, Stephen Ellis. Let's get to our daily bets for the day. We did not hit the shot prop on our shot prop parlay yesterday, but we did hit the Rangers on the money line. So that was a nice hit on the Road Dogs in New York. Tonight, I got a couple of plays for you on the NHL slate. Let's start with a little same game parlay. Dallas coming off a disappointing loss against the Ducks earlier this week. I like them in a get right spot against the Sharks, and I'm using the same game parlay tool to cook it up. Give me the top line duo, Hintz and Robertson, to each get a point. Give me the Stars on the puck line. It's juiced up at a nice plus 220. I like Dallas in a get right spot this evening, and I like the under. No one likes betting on the unders, but come on, it's Nashville and Seattle. For Nashville, the under is hit in 4 of 5. For Seattle, the under has hit in 3 of 5. I like taking the plus 100 under 5.5 goals tonight between the Kraken and the Predators. And that is it for our daily bets, brought to you by Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION, NATION, to get in on a huge range of markets. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Let's wrap up the show with a little bit of garbage time. Frank, Winter Classic jerseys dropped for the matchup on New Year's Eve this year between the Chicago Blackhawks and St. Louis Blues out at Wrigley Field. I guess slap a grade on these two jerseys that we'll see in the 2025 Winter Classic.
All right, so the Hawks get 10 out of 10. I'm a sucker for the circle logo, and it just looks really well done, and it fits. I don't want to hammer the Blues, but there's not really anything creative about it. And I think in some ways they're kind of a victim of their own success previously with the Winter Classic jerseys that they had, the cream colored jerseys with the, elongated blue note that just were so good. And if I'm not mistaken, that was at in St. Louis at Busch Stadium. So to me, like, they're fine. They're not the best ever. But the Hawks are really good, and the tan, like the natural leather tan gloves and everything, that'll look great on both. But for me, I just missing a little bit of creativity for the Blues angle.
Anywhere you'd like to see the league still go here in terms of the Winter Classic? I know it's been around now for well north of a decade, but is there one spot or maybe one organization that you'd wish they'd give the nod to?
Yeah, I mean, why aren't we playing a Florida Panthers Winter Classic game at the Miami Marlins Stadium? I mean, you and I went to a ball game there, perfectly cool and comfortable inside. Seems like you could fit a ballpark or a rink there quite nicely, and you don't have to deal with the elements, but you get to deal with the sort of thought process of hockey near the beach in an environment like that. I mean, the Panthers are, I think, one of the only, if not the only teams yet to have played in an outdoor game. I think that's correct. So
Columbus, I don't think has ever gotten one.
Well, Columbus has one this year with the Stadium Series game at the Horseshoe. So look, the Panthers kind of stand alone, and like, let's put these in some exotic places now. Like, you've done they've been all over the place. We had Lake Tahoe during COVID. We've had Dodger Stadium, and we've done all those. Why not just get daring?
I don't mind that at all. All right, that was a great edition of Daily Faceoff Live with the trade targets from Frank, the questions from the YouTube chat. Shout out to our producer, Pat Puff, as well, for doing a bang-up job. That is a wrap on a Wednesday edition of the show. We'll be back tomorrow with John Goins and more right here at noon Eastern. Enjoy the hockey tonight. We'll chat with you tomorrow. What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you're going to want to hit the subscribe button to not miss any of our content. From daily live shows with Frank Saravalli to analysis from former NHLers to exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in the hockey world on Frankly Speaking. You're going to want to hit that subscribe button and stay up to date with everything going on in the hockey world.